So we're going to continue our panel now with Sarah Harris, who's had over 15 years of experience. Sarah knows firsthand the powerful role that media plays in creating and shaping movement as the vice president and founder of Insight. Welcome, Sarah. She leads a team to maximize the potential of people to come together for good and the ability of one to matter for the collective impact. And she's also served on a variety of successful campaigns ranging from getting people tested for HIV to advancing education reform and encouraging student attendance. Thank you, Sarah. And joining us too is Matt Higginson. Matt leads Medium's efforts to engage politicians, government leaders, and advocacy organizations, hey Matt, to tell stories and create dialogue and to publish the world. Prior to Medium, he was the director of college organizing at One, a campaign and advocacy organization that was founded by Bono. Kind of cool boss to have.
They're in town, too.
Are they?
They are.
Are they going to play tonight for us?
Not for us.
That maybe you could pull some connections.
Actually, yes. Come on. Mic drop.
Mic drop. That would be a really good mic drop. Well, welcome, guys. I want to start with you, Sarah, and tell us a little bit. You're kind of in this older medium of radio, but doing kind of new and different, interesting things with social campaigns. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. I appreciate the introduction. Matt and I had a lovely conversation earlier today about this sort of battle, if you will, between traditional media and new media and social platforms. So we're going to jump right into that. I would say we're inside of a radio company, a very traditional radio broadcast company, and we use the power of that media to do good in our communities through advertising campaigns. So we're coming at it from an advertising perspective. And where we think about sort of this new versus old, we think of radio as an original social media. It's very connected in the local communities. It's very relevant in people's daily lives, and that has a lot of influence, and we want to use that influence for good. On the flip side, and sort of segueing into innovation, if you will, IMIS has created an app called Next Radio, which is a gateway to turn on an FM chip in your cell phone so that you can have very traditional broadcast radio right there in your mobile device, which is where everyone wants their content today. So what we're doing with Insight is taking the power of media as we know it in traditional radio broadcast form locally in our communities, and we're putting advertising campaigns on those stations that help inspire our audiences to take action. And as a company, we're embracing the future of where the platform is going and where people want their content, and have created a gateway for people to access us through Next Radio.
And you've got the other flip side, social media, online, Medium. Tell us a little bit about.
Yeah. So I heard Peter's introduction when he came out, and he said, I'm from the media and I'm here to apologize. I'll say I'm from the internet and I'm here to apologize. Medium is a platform built fundamentally around the idea that clicks and page views are a BS metric that were created by Silicon Valley and Wall Street to monetize content on the internet. But it's not an actual good measurement of value on the internet. We value engagement, we value total time reading, we value whether or not people spend time interacting and engaging with content. So we've built a social media platform for people to do just that, to self-publish. We were founded by Ev Williams and Biz Stone, who started Twitter. Prior to Twitter, Ev built and started Blogger. So if Blogger was, let's give everyone a piece of the internet to tell their story, to publish, to share ideas, and Twitter was let's connect people via a network to elevate the best ideas to the top, to do real-time response to things that are happening in the news. Medium seeks to kind of marry those two principles, right? So people who are passionate about ideas or about concepts or stories can publish those, share those with the world, and again, fundamental to our experience on Medium is this idea of engagement. It's not an afterthought. It's fundamental to the experience and it's participatory at its core. We think that conversation and dialogue actually heightens content and heightens the way people interact with content. So we're building a platform to do that.
So can you give us an example of where you felt that people were really engaged because of the story that was posted?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. This is the first one that comes to mind, so I'll share that. So in my role, I work with the presidential campaigns, and I work with other politicians and other leaders that want to deploy Medium as an opportunity to engage and to build conversation. We've seen a lot of great conversations around that. I think that'll certainly pick up as the election cycle heats up. I have a friend who's a pastor in Portland who I worked with, and he attended his first gay pride parade. and he wrote a story on that experience, and he went there with kind of a reconciliation notion of, my perspective on this has changed, and he was there to kind of apologize in many respects. And the notes that he received, the responses that were written to that were very powerful, and it was, individuals and parents who thanked him for telling his story, and it took off. It had a sense of virality, and we don't think that the audience's role is to share content. The audience's role is to interact with it and to collide with their thoughts and to use words to converse, to build upon or push back against something. And yeah, he had a real powerful experience through that.
But there's not really a metric, though, as you talked about, to say, wow, you know what? People are really engaged by this story. How do you judge that and tell whether something's really working?
I think it's a combination of metrics. We're always fine-tuning that, and we're trying to, frankly, find what that is. In 2014, there was 1 millennia of time spent reading content on Medium. We think that's pretty powerful. I think that's a good signal that we're building a platform and an audience of people who are explicitly looking for content and ideas that will help shape their perspective, that will help give them fodder for discussion, right? Think about the last time you read an article or you read a piece of content that was so inspiring or so thought-provoking to you, you shared it with your friends. And maybe you met up at a coffee shop, or maybe via email you had a discussion about that. We want to capture that sentiment and that dynamic online so that people can experience that, so that the world can have a seat at the table to participate if they so choose.
And Sarah, you talk about millennials and trying to push them through advertising in particular for change and good. How do you do that through advertising?
Yeah, we look at understanding people individually and then draw that out to people at large in the form of creating a movement, if you will. So when we are designing our campaigns, the philosophy we're using is really meet them where they are, engage with people, which we do through media as a way to create that one-to-one relationship. And then through the message or through the story we're telling, inspire people to think or feel differently, ultimately about an issue or about an action or a behavior that they might change.
How do you do that with radio or music?
Yeah, so more specifically, I'll tell you a campaign example, if you will. One of our programs in St. Louis, we worked with an auto dealership that wanted to combat distracted driving among teens, and they created a Teen Safe Driver program that we use local radio, social media through our radio station channels, direct outreach, PR, to share that message so that people would understand this is an important issue, what can we do? But more than just putting an issue out there, so we're raising consciousness of that issue, we needed people to do something if they're gonna change their behavior. So in that campaign, we had teens take a safe driving pledge and then share that pledge through their social media channels, ultimately using peer-to-peer to influence their other teen drivers to also be safe, share that through social media, and then the auto dealership group that we were working with offered a scholarship to the school that had the most number of students engaging with that message and actually taking the pledge to be a safe driver. And when we started with the campaign, we had no idea. I mean, everyone's talking about don't text and drive and be a safe driver. We weren't sure what the impact was going to be, and we're trying to brand this dealership as very invested in protecting teen drivers. We had overwhelming response, 75,000 teens just in the St. Louis area took the pledge, shared it via social media, and we had schools competing to try to win the scholarship prize that the dealership had put up. It was a fantastic example of taking a concept of how do we use advertising for good and how do we connect businesses with millennials and get them to actually do something, kind of leveraged all the right things to meet people where they are, get them to think differently, and give them a really simple way to act so they can say, I took the pledge. Have you taken the pledge?
And could you tell, were driving accidents down from texting or anything like that? Were there any statistics?
We would love to know the statistics on accidents avoided by not texting. We don't know in that specific instance. Another story, just very briefly, we worked with a campaign out in Los Angeles to teach young Latino mothers proper sleeping habits for their babies. They were having a spike in babies with sudden infant death syndrome. And we learned that it was really cultural to sleep with your child or to sleep your child wrapped in blankets that were actually very dangerous. So we used one of our personalities from one of our radio stations to endorse the campaign message and provide very simple educational tips to these young mothers on how to properly position the child for safe sleep. And they were able to track through county health statistics a decline in the number of infant deaths.
It's powerful.
Which is really amazing. So I know that people who know me well think that I am on this mission to use advertising to change the world, but I do really think we're changing the world. We're saving lives, and these are simple examples, but I think we can all be doing this day in and day out on our campaigns and in each of the roles that we have.
And if you live in a community where you have to drive, you've got the radio on all the time, you hear what's going on, it's a pretty powerful medium. So, okay, a question for you guys. Is paying for exposure on social media a wasted asset?
I don't know. I guess it depends. Yeah, I think, I don't know. Yeah, maybe. How's that?
Take a maybe.
Like, I think it depends on what you're paying for, what the platform is, what your message is. Maybe paying for things helps kind of get it to a tipping point where it takes off more naturally. Again, it's kind of this notion about whether or not you're paying for broadcast or whether or not you're paying to try and incite action or whether or not you're paying to try and build engagement and start a conversation. I think there's tools at your disposal that don't require money to do all of those things. If you feel like you've exhausted your resources and that's the last step, maybe that's a place to go.
I would say not a waste. I'm unabashedly in the world of using media for good. And one of the things that we are able to do through our radio station brands and through the personalities on our stations is that they have huge social media followings. So we all the time work with clients who want to buy access to that followership and use the influence of a particular personality to deliver a message via their social media channels. So I think if you're using it to leverage the influence of media over that broader audience, it can certainly be dollars well spent.
And you can't underestimate the power of your local media personality, especially in radio. I remember I'm from Tampa, Florida, and they always plugged Nutrisystem. And I felt like I needed to go on Nutrisystem because they were so excited about, like, they really get into it, and you somehow feel vested because of them.
You're exactly right. It's something it's sort of the magic, I guess, of local radio is that people wake up listening to it, they're driving to work listening to it, and they begin to develop kind of this relationship between you and your favorite personality or your morning show host, whomever that is. And suddenly that person, without you even realizing it, becomes very influential in suggesting things for your life. And so we want to use that influence for good.
Yeah, it's almost subliminal.
Let me push back then a little bit, right? So I'm kind of crystallizing my thoughts in real time, which is always dangerous. One of the things that we ascribe to at Medium is that it shouldn't matter who you know or the monetary resources that you have to elevate a smart idea into the public discourse. It should matter whether or not the idea is smart and whether or not it resonates with people. So I would say yes and no. And this isn't so much a plug for the platform, but I would say that if you've got a good idea and if you engage people in a thoughtful way to improve upon that idea and hear criticism openly and transparently, I think that there are ways to have your campaign, your cause, your idea heard that don't require dollars spent, that don't require access to celebrity, that don't require paying social media platforms to promote your stuff. If the role of the audience is to engage and to respond and help you build upon your idea rather than just disseminate it, I think that gives people a seat at the table, that they're far more willing to be a participatory member of that campaign, of that effort, rather than just being someone who it's being broadcast to.
I think what you're touching on here is authenticity of message
Yeah.
and also surrendering control of message, which is one of the great things that we see in content, user-generated content, and on social media platforms, whether it's a traditional media or something like Medium that is entirely a space for public discourse. If you have an idea or a starting point and turn it over, people will make it better and they will advance it for you, which is, I think, one of the great merging trends in media.
Okay. What are the best tools and resources to get a nonprofit's cause and work out there to the public? So if you're a nonprofit, does paying for something sort of take the bite out of what you're trying to do if you're paying for the
I
space?
think you've heard probably from a lot of smart people today that have talked about some of those tools. I don't remember if anyone said this, but I think someone alluded to the fact that content is king. I think that's true. I think that storytelling is imperative. I think humanizing, as I said, I spend a lot of time with politicians and trying to help educate, and educate sounds like the wrong word, but how to facilitate discussion on what type of content will do well, right? How to tell their story. Policymakers are in their very own way, they're brands. They're trying to build relationships with the electorate, with their constituents to win re-election, to win their votes, to get them to engage in a very specific behavior. When I go on the Hill and a press secretary or a digital director says, great, now we have a platform that we can publish our press releases to, because no one is reading our press releases. I tell them, no one's reading your press releases because your press releases are boring and they say nothing of consequence. And if you deploy that same strategy on Medium, you're going to be met with similar results. It's not because it's not designed well and it's not part of a network and it's not surrounded by other content that is smart, and we're not trying to kind of clickbait you around our site. That's not the reason it's not doing well. Again, it's because you're not saying anything of consequence. You're being as milquetoast and as bland as possible, and people see through that. So that's authenticity, right? I don't know if that answered the question. I got off on a tangent.
I think building on your storytelling, that's what nonprofits have. They have a story that is told authentically, can be very meaningful to their audiences. And if I were a nonprofit executive, I would think really hard about what is my story, why am I doing this, what's my passion, what's my purpose, and how do I tell that story not in a boring press release, but in a really compelling way. And then I don't have millions of dollars to spend, all over different media channels. So who are my stakeholders? Who are the groups that I have access and influence over, and tell my story effectively to them in such a way that they are then inspired and mobilized to carry that story forward. I mean, those are the basics of how do you create a movement, right? Tell the story, connect with people, let them be the ambassadors that share that for you.
Yeah.
And I think nonprofits can have a much bigger impact maybe than what they realize with very simple things.
Yeah, and tell the individual story who's representative of the large stat, right? That's probably not really news for a lot of people in this room, but I think that's a compelling way to do things. It's certainly, at the one campaign, we did a lot of work with the Gates Foundation. They've put a lot of research into how to tell these stories and how to communicate very complex problems and solutions to those problems to maybe an audience that not necessarily disinterested, but it's not top of mind. And certainly one of the preeminent kind of findings out of a lot of that is tell the individual's story, right? Talk about the issue through the lens of the person.
So if you're doing something about HIV, you find that advocate whose story is so powerful that will compel you to.
That's exactly right. If there's a policymaker on Capitol Hill who's introducing a bill to alleviate a specific problem, don't talk about the stats and don't talk about the problem in very general terms. Talk about the individual that this policy solution will help.
When you're advising politicians, people on Capitol Hill, what do you tell them about connecting to social media, to the audience out there online? What do they not get on Capitol Hill about social media?
I think I alluded to one thing, right? Washington, D.C. is kind of slow to change and slow to adopt. One of the things I tell them is, Medium as a social media platform, unlike other social media platforms, early adopters and people who engage with, here's what I tell them. People who emulate the type of behavior that they want to see, whether that's on Medium recommending stories or highlighting or adding annotations or writing responses and building a conversation, if you emulate the type of behavior that you want people to take, then they'll respond accordingly. Early adopters of new platforms have more sway in the shape and narrative of the conversation. So a lot of times policymakers are waiting until something is proven to be a success before they adopt it, and by then it's too late. I think you can think of probably politicians that have adopted platforms or adopted social media channels early, and because of that, they had a lot more sway based on the audiences that those social media channels were reaching.
So how do you feel about clickbait, and how do you draw people into your stories quickly without seeming inauthentic? That's been a big key today, was authenticity online. Yeah. What would you say? What do you do to make it feel more authentic?
I would say our campaigns are not about click rate. It's about telling a personal story in a way that the audience who's reading the story or hearing it can see themselves in it, that they can relate to it very personally. And then we're wanting them to take some kind of action. And that action might be online, it might be social media action, it could be signing a pledge, it could be texting something. But more often it's a behavior we're wanting to change, which means you've got to affect how people think about an issue and then ultimately invite them to come and participate in some way differently than they would have. So I would say our engagements are meant to be simple and effective in driving behavior and not existing only in clicking.
Yeah, I think I addressed this a little bit earlier, and that the root of the problem is that, again, Wall Street and Silicon Valley have chosen to monetize the click and monetize the page view, and that's created a culture on the internet that sucks, frankly, and that's why I'm here to apologize. And you know, I think we have a lot of say in how we engage with media platforms that kind of thrive off of clickbait or bouncing you around their site, or if you're producing content for a website and then that website puts advertisements in the middle of your story, right? So there's a policymaker on Capitol Hill who wrote an op-ed for a major news publication, USA Today, I'll say their name. They wrote an op-ed for USA Today. This was my second day on the job, and I went to go see what they chose. They've been using Medium. I went to go see what they chose to publish at USA Today versus Medium. And my reading experience was, landing page was this giant ad to go to a Caribbean vacation. Scrolling through it, there were giant underwear ads to the right. There was content, there was ads in the middle of their story. And at the bottom, I was invited to see how the body painting scene is spicing up Las Vegas. This had nothing to do with anything that they were talking about, right? But that is the way that they have to, that's the only way they make their money, right? We want to fix that at Medium. We want people to own their content, to, you know, I think that content is moving away from millions of websites, and it's coalescing around networks, and it's coalescing around, you know, kind of networks and individual websites. We want to build a platform that we're never going to bounce you around for clickbait. We're never going to juxtapose your content next to advertisements for underwear or other stories that are on our site about Kim Kardashian and Kanye West's updates. Like, we're there when we're building a platform so that people that have interesting stories to tell can do that in their own space, own their own content without the distractions that the internet is so affluent with.
There's a couple of points that you're making, if I can jump in on those, about advertising at large, right? One, if we want to have effective advertising, it's not meant to be sort of a bullhorn in your face. It needs to be something that's more relevant to the user. And I think there's an opportunity, especially in the digital space, to customize which ads are being served to which user, hopefully in a more, I can't say that it would always be authentic, but hopefully at least in a more targeted way. And then there's a whole nother conversation about advertising messages, and this is really more for the brand community. Don't talk at people with your advertising. Let your advertising, like the content we're talking about here, invite people into a dialogue about something bigger. And particularly with millennials, there's a bigger shift in purpose-driven advertising and actual pure-on advertising messages, but they're inviting you to go on a volunteerism trip, for instance, or to buy Tom's shoes instead of another alternative. So there's a way to serve the right ad to the right person, and then there's a way to have your advertising message delivered in a way that's inviting a conversation, and it's about something bigger than just a product or service. It's about a relationship between perhaps a millennial and a purpose-driven brand.
So if it's not about the clicks, and you guys both seem to agree, it's really about engagement, taking it one step further. If both of you guys were to start as the president of CNN.com or ABCnews.com, that title doesn't exist, but let's say that you, let's just say that you were, what would be the one thing you would change online for traditional news websites?
Wow, I would go in a bunch of directions with that. In disclosure, my first passion was to be a journalist, so I've got a lot of thoughts about news integrity. And following the Upworthy gentleman that was here earlier, I think the first change I would make is the notion of if it bleeds, it leads would go away, and a little bit more balance between the actual news coverage that's happening, because I think that would draw in more users today and would lead to greater engagement.
So do away with the negative news is what you're saying?
I wouldn't do away with it, because I think there's room to speak the truth of what's happening and to paint a real picture of what's going on in our world. But I do think there's room for balance of some really innovative things that are happening and good breakthroughs that are happening, and maybe a little more balance in the content would allow for greater and deeper engagement versus people who might check out of those news outlets because it's known for the same tragic story over and over, told 50 different times?
Yeah, I don't know where I would start. Not that I have a grand plan. I think one of the things that I would probably emphasize, and it's one of the paradigms that we ascribe to at Medium, is that, good content isn't always derived from professional content creators. It's most often derived from people who are passionate about a specific issue or a specific story. So, if I was advising ABC News, I would say identify those people who may not be professional content creators or writers or journalists, and that's kind of fraught with, pitfalls, but identify ways to find people who are passionate about certain issues to tell their story and highlight that rather than just the professional content creators.
Because passion translates on.
Yeah, that's authenticity defined.
Can you guys speak a little bit to targeting advertisements? How does this affect individual privacy?
I don't even know if I understand the question.
Yeah, I don't think I do either. Shall we go to the next one?
All right. Punt.
All right. Here's an interesting one. How will media make money? The ads on USA Today are there for revenue.
Yeah.
They don't have angel investors funding them.
Great question. I get asked it in every single meeting that I have, and my answer has always been the same to this point, which is it's not my job to figure that out. Which, speaking of punting, look, Medium is, so Ev started, after leaving Twitter, started a venture capital fund called Obvious Ventures. Medium was the first project that Obvious funded. Obvious Ventures is a double bottom line VC firm, right? So they seek to build profitable companies that have a social impact and do a social good. The social good that we are trying to provide is elevating smart ideas, giving a platform for meaningful, thoughtful discussion with an audience that may not be the biggest, may not be ubiquitous, but it's the right audience, and it's the audience that values thoughtfulness. It's the audience that values interaction and discussion, and is hopefully the value that it's providing is restoring a little bit of the ability for people to communicate and build upon each other's ideas. Here's one way I try to crystallize it for folks is I had lunch a few weeks ago with a gentleman who's raising a lot of money for a very high-profile presidential candidate. And this person said, I had a really amazing interaction and discussion with this particular candidate on immigration for about 45 minutes. And I said, take that discussion that you just had and imagine your candidate being able to replicate that sentiment and that dynamic that you captured behind closed doors in a public place online. Right? So how can we give the world a seat at the table to participate in these discussions that are happening all over the place in churches and classrooms and coffee shops and around the proverbial water cooler and bring those to a public place where anyone can participate? There's value in the collective thought, and that's the kind of the double bottom line that we're trying to offer. And I did not answer the question.
No, but you made some great points, so we'll take it. We'll take it.
I can suggest some models of advertising that might be helpful for you.
We'll always be ad-free. You'll never see your content on Medium with ad banners sitting on the side of it. That's just a promise and a bottom line that we've drawn in the sand.
Can you guys speak to using social media and advertising to merge private and nonprofit partners? So how do you use social media for that and advertising?
To blend
Sarah?
private and nonprofit partners.
Yep.
The best way we do that is traditional cause marketing examples where we would have a brand that wants to promote a particular cause or a nonprofit organization, and we would craft the story of those two organizations coming together and then share that via social as a way to invite people into a conversation.
So you take one sort of topic and merge it together with both of the groups? Is that what you're saying, like one cause?
Yes. So for just a quick story, we work with Subway Sandwiches and the American Heart Association. They have a known national partnership between the two brands. We do a campaign in Indianapolis called Indy Has Heart, and it's all about trying to raise awareness, specifically among women in heart disease, and to know your numbers and to know your stats. So we would take those two brands of Subway and the Heart Association, craft social media messages geared toward women, and push them out on our branded social media channels through the Heart Association, through Subway, kind of using all those different platforms to then basically evangelize that message about we're co-branding the cause and the corporation together with this message toward women of knowing your numbers for heart disease.
And how do you know that works and doesn't just go over their heads? One ear out the other.
It's a really good question, and it's making me think of another example, and I'm sorry to switch stories, but another campaign was around raising money for Ronald McDonald House Charities that really illustrates impact. So on social media, we were talking about the importance of providing housing for families whose children are in a children's hospital, and we made it really simple and said it's $29 a night to stay in a Ronald McDonald House. We're doing an online pledge drive, essentially. We would talk about it on air on the radio. We'd talk about it on the radio social media channels. And immediately the response, I think it was like in 11 minutes, we raised like $15,000, all via social media engagement. We would put out the stats about how much does it cost, and here's what's happening right here in your neighborhood. People connected with that, responded via social media, and pledged to give, to support. So that's where we know it's more than just putting a message out into the marketplace, but we're resonating with a cause that matters to our listeners, something very local in their communities, and we're giving them an easy way to act, and they are indeed responding.
So you've touched on something that touches them and makes them want to do something about
You're
it.
exactly right. And that's what makes these campaigns work. It's back to authenticity. It needs to matter to the consumer. The story that you're telling needs to matter to the consumer, and then you need to give them simple, easy ways that they can act, and their action makes them feel connected to something bigger than themselves. I'm helping people in my neighborhood or my community, or I'm a part of a cause or a movement that's bigger than me, and I think that's what consumers at large, and particularly millennials, are looking for. And through advertising and through the programs that we run, we're providing that conduit for that to happen.
Matt, what is your prediction around the media channel that'll see the most growth over the next year?
Medium. The media channel that will see the most growth of next year, I think that I'll speak about it maybe in the context of the 2016 cycle. I think that Medium will play a pretty pivotal role in how the campaigns tell their stories and interact with the digital audience. I think Periscope and Meerkat present some pretty unique opportunities. I think that the candidates and campaigns that are smart will probably deploy those in very interesting ways, and ways that kind of, again, build a level of intimacy that's been lost in presidential campaigns. I think that one of the benefits of the emergence of all these tools is that it almost behooves or compels campaigns, candidates, people in the public space to use them in a way that is real and is authentic, because it's just so easy to sniff out the BS, right? It's just so easy to sniff out the ones that aren't doing it well. And they can't avoid them, right? They have to go to where the conversations are happening. And it also, I think, kind of, requires them to build a level of transparency into their operations that hasn't always been there. I think the more sunlight you can add to any political process is always better, and I think that a lot of these tools help do that in very thoughtful, very, very meaningful and real ways.
But do these candidates run the risk of oversharing? Like, do we want to see Hillary Clinton walking up to Chipotle, whether she gets the burrito or the bowl? I mean, do we want that live newscast, the broadcast of these intimate details?
Right, probably, that's a pretty specific one, but probably not. I don't know, I'm not interested in that. I guess the short answer is no. And the short answer is yes, there is oversharing, and no, we don't need to see all of those things. And I think that there are smart ways to deploy them in a way that isn't overshare, isn't using them for the sake of using them, just to say that you do. It's not doing Snapchat interviews just so somebody writes a story that says, oh, so-and-so's doing Snapchat interviews. If you're doing that because you really think that that's an interesting way to engage, then that will be felt and will be perceived that way.
So you've got to have something behind it, like some sort of purpose of why you're engaging and allowing them into your life for this broadcast.
And I think that if the purpose is, oh, we just want to do it because we have to, it's going to fail. Again, if this is another thing that I tell policymakers and their offices is, if you are integrating Medium into your digital strategy and you're doing it as a way to just have a box that some staffer needs to check every day or every week, then your content's not going to be that great. Wait until you have something interesting to say. And I think we've probably seen that on Twitter and Facebook, and there's these staffers and there's these policymakers that feel like, oh, I have to be doing something today, and even if they don't have something, they make it up on the fly, and it just comes across as so bland, right? So wait until there is something of consequence and of importance to say, and that's the right time. Wait until the medium, pun intended, wait until the medium fits the message that you're trying to convey.
Speaking of medium, you guys sort of ticked off some in traditional media earlier this year.
Yeah, we sure did.
Really upset us.
I know.
I thought we discussed that. You guys got excerpts of the speech, big speech. Tell us a little bit about that with President Obama.
Well, so yeah, we didn't get experts. Like, the White House created a Medium account, and the White House has been using Medium in a really great way. The White House chose to release President Obama's State of the Union full speech, not just excerpts, the full speech. They self-published it to Medium, broadcast it to the world before they sent it to the media, certainly before they released the traditional embargo.
And told us there was an embargo. Don't
right?
touch it until after the embargo, but suddenly we see Medium with the excerpts.
And I think that's powerful, and I think that's a beautiful thing that that any individual in the world can follow along in real time, or can write annotations or write responses or engage with the president's State of the Union, probably one of the most important speeches they give each year. They can engage with it in real time, and the White House and the president owns that. It's not being repurposed or republished on another website.
But we wanted to own it.
I know.
Well, I think the point you brought up earlier about if you were the captain running news for ABC, that you would look for people who tell authentic stories. Maybe that's the shift that we see happening in Medium. Is it's less about the timeline and who owns that content at the moment that it's released, and it's more about the authentic curators or commentary on that content, or crafting a conversation and inviting people into a dialogue about the content, because that's something with the breakdowns, I think, of traditional media, the consolidation, the openness that the internet creates for sharing. We have to shift how those lines are drawn, and that might be an opportunity.
Yeah, and it just lowers the filter, right? It's no longer, the context of your speech or of your thoughts or of your op-ed being filtered by the platform that it sits on or the news reporter who's reporting on it. It's your own words. It's
your own words. Is that what presidential candidates or other people in politics have to gain by not doing maybe the Sunday morning talk show, but choosing something online that might have more engagement? Well,
and I wouldn't say that it needs to be either or. This is and both, right? This is just another way to use a great tool to communicate. This isn't, I understand why a member of Congress wants to publish the op-ed in the New York Times or in the Wall Street Journal or in the Washington Post. I get that, and they should do that, but they should cross-post it to Medium. Our reading experience is going to be much better, and they own their content on Medium, and we're not going to give it a headline. Like, Mitt Romney's campaign was plagued by a headline that the New York Times gave to one of his op-eds, which was "Let Detroit Go Bankrupt." That's not the headline that Mitt Romney chose for his op-ed. That's the headline that the New York Times chose. And I think that policymakers, and this holds true for any advocacy or any cause organization, they understand the value of owning your content, owning your story, and telling it in your own words.
Very interesting points. I think that'll do it for us right now. Sarah and Matt, thank you both very, very much for your insights.